Did you know that one of the main reasons why people leave church, why people go from church to church, why people even walk away from God, is because of church hurt? Because of things that happen to them inside of the church. And I believe when this takes place that oftentimes there's something far deeper going on inside of an individual, and I want to talk about that in this video. But first, think about the life of Jesus. Those who were closest to him, who were walking with him spiritually, they abandoned him, they misunderstood him, they denied him, they even betrayed him. And there would have been great potential there for church hurt, far more than any of us have ever experienced. But what's interesting that I find a lot of times in churches is that people are so offended and hurt and develop resentments over such minor things. And I want to talk about some of that in this video. Now, I recognize that there are major things that can happen in churches which are really bad, that can cause hurt and that can cause devastating effects. I also recognize that there are a number of churches that just aren't good churches, and the fellowship isn't legitimate fellowship. And I'm not saying anyone should remain in one of those places. But what I am saying is that there is so much church hurt that takes place all over the place, and often a lot of it is very trivial. Now, I can understand this a bit because I experienced this too, particularly in my earlier days in the Christian walk. I would get very offended, I would get very upset, I would get very resentful. I would think that these people around me should be acting this way or should be acting that way, or they shouldn't have said this about me, or they should have said this. But I came to a realization, and this realization was that I was actually very insecure. I realized that I wasn't going into church from this position where my identity was in Christ. I was on the rock and I could pour out to others and minister to others freely. I was coming from this place where my identity was in getting the approval of other people. My identity was in other people validating my worth. And when people didn't do that, then all of a sudden I would get offended because my needs were not being met. And I realized the problems that this can cause. And I believe this is a problem for a lot of people. I believe a lot of people are very insecure, and they're going into churches and their insecurities are producing this church hurt. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't saying things that could be considered offensive by some people. I'm not saying that we should just excuse these things either. But what I am saying is that a lot of people are actually letting other people be Lord over their life, in that what someone says or doesn't say, does or doesn't do, actually determines how you feel in terms of being offended, in terms of holding resentments. The way that you're living is dictated by the way that people are treating you. But Jesus tells us that if we build our house on the rock, on his words, that when the storm comes, we're not going to be blown away by like those who build their house on the sand. And if we're putting our identity in what other people think of us or how they treat us, then we're building our house on the sand. Isn't it amazing how Jesus, he had all of these things happen to him. The people even that he died for selflessly, he did no wrong, mocked him, killed him. And he knew his mission, he knew who he was. His identity was established. The question is your identity established? Is your identity in Christ? Or is your identity somewhere else? It's so amazing when I look back now, I think to myself about how things could trigger me so easily before. I could get so easily offended before, and I even thought maybe it was a sign of strength to stand up and to, I'm not going to take this. But I realized, you know what, it all comes from a place of insecurity. It all comes from a place of not knowing who I am in Christ. And now anyone can pretty much say anything to me or do anything, and I don't take offense at it. Because I'm free in Christ. I can go into a church and I can come from this place of I just want to pour out to other people regardless of what people think of me or how they treat me, because I'm in Christ. That's where my identity is. And I can recognize as well that there are times when I did things and I said things that were offensive to people. Sometimes I didn't mean it, and I would wish people could have extended grace to me, and I want to be able to extend that grace to other people. Sometimes it can be misunderstandings, but sometimes it can be people legitimately are trying to hurt other people. And at those times, like I said, we don't excuse it. We don't think it's an okay way to behave. And we don't have to suppress it. We can talk to someone about it in the right way. But at the same time, we can come at it from a place of compassion and love, in recognizing that, you know what, that person is acting the way they are because they don't know who they are in Christ. And if they knew who they were in Christ, they wouldn't act in that way. And I've acted that way before when I didn't know who I was in Christ. And now I look back and I never would have acted that way if I knew who I was in Christ. So I can have compassion for them and pray for them. And not from a way that, I'm up here and they're down there and, they just need to get better. No, just a genuine love for that person that really wants to see them know their identity in Christ, and to continue to pray that I would continue to know my identity in Christ as well. There's a couple of verses that I really love relating to this. In Proverbs 19:11, it says, "It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." In 1 Peter 4:8, it says, "Love covers a multitude of sins." And that is so true. If we genuinely love people and our identity is in Christ, we're not going to get worked up at every little thing that's happening. Offenses will come at us, but you know what? We will love people and we are in Christ. We're going to overlook those offenses. Our love is going to cover a multitude of sins. And at the end of the day, we're going to be walking in a place of freedom. And then people will be looking at you and saying, wow, you know what? I want that freedom in Christ. How do I have that? And that's going to lead them closer to wanting to know more about God as well. So where are you at in regards to this? I just see so many people get caught up in so many minor things. And I just think to myself, really? Like, why are people getting caught up in this? Is it because your identity's threatened when this has happened? Is it because you're caring too much for your life? Is it because you haven't died to yourself? Is it because you don't know your identity in Christ? Because if you do, you're not going to let people impact you in that way. And it's a process that we will grow in. Now, I'm not saying that we have to be in close fellowship with everyone. I'm not saying that we have to trust everyone. No, there's wisdom in terms of those decisions. But what I am saying is that we are to love other people. We are to overlook offenses. And we are to just be someone grounded in Christ, who is going into a place and who is just pouring out the love of Christ and walking in truth and being an example to other people. So I don't know where you're at with this. I don't know if this is something that you struggle with, but maybe something to think about. And what I would encourage anyone to do is to find their identity in Christ more and more. And I've found for myself that when I've done this, you know what, all of a sudden what people say, what people think, it doesn't bother me. Even if what they've said is wrong, even if I've been grieved in a certain way, you know what? I'm not going to let that dictate whether I get offended or not. I'm not going to let that dictate whether I have resentment or not. No, I am in Christ, and from that place I'm going to love like Christ loved, and I'm going to look at his example of how he loved those around him who were imperfect and didn't always treat him the way that he deserved to be treated. Would love to get your comments on this video. Leave them below, and I'll talk to you soon. God bless you, friends.